Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Bellant, and I am the Education and Prevention Director at the Bridge Over Troubled Waters. I have had the pleasure of being here for 7 years, engaging in education and prevention work in our community. And today, what we're going to be talking about in honor of the 50th anniversary of Title IX is how can we engage in primary prevention work on our college campuses to prevent sexual violence. When we talk about Title IX says that all educational institutions should be working to ensure their campuses are free of sexual violence so that all students have equal access to their education. So that's what we're going to be really looking at today is how can we change the culture on our campuses so that our students are not experiencing this form of violence. So let's look at our objectives for today. First, we're going to really define what is primary prevention of sexual assault. What does that look like? And then, of course, we're going to look at the root causes of sexual violence and the protective factors, because what we're going to be doing with primary prevention of sexual violence is look at why does sexual violence exist? Why is it happening? That way we can target our programming surrounding how do we reduce and eliminate these factors that are causing sexual violence to be so prevalent in our communities. And then, of course, we're going to be looking at our protective factors founded by the CDC, the Center of Disease Control, to look at what are these factors that we want to promote, that we want to instill more of in our campus, among our communities. And then lastly, we're going to look really specifically about what can primary prevention programming look like on your campus. So the first question I have is, let's think about what is prevention of sexual violence. Normally, when I ask people, what does prevention of sexual violence look like? They tell me things such as, well, it's watching your drink. It's making sure we dress conservatively, specifically girls and women, if they ever go out on the town. It's using the buddy system. It is making sure that you have something with you. If you're walking home at night, like maybe your keys are in between your fingers, maybe you have some mace, maybe you have a whistle. I've heard all different kinds of things, even own a big aggressive dog, right? No self-defense. The list goes on and on and on as far as these quote unquote things that individuals can do to prevent getting sexually assaulted. Now, what I'm here to say is that these are actually not prevention of sexual violence techniques. This is not primary prevention. This is what we call risk reduction. So risk reduction is things that we can do. And when I say we, I mean potential victims can do to feel safer or reduce the likelihood that they will be assaulted. Now, I say that with the caveat of most research says at least 80% of all sexual assaults are conducted by someone who is someone we trust. It's going to be a family member. It's going to be a friend. It's going to be a dating partner, someone that we already know and trust. It's not going to be a stranger who is committing sexual violence. And so these risk reduction techniques, we would only potentially use when we're thinking about a stranger, because our friend could be our buddy system. We're not ready to use, mace or dressing conservatively around our dating partner or our marital partner, right? So there's a big difference between risk reduction techniques and primary prevention. Risk reduction also does not prevent further or future perpetration. It does nothing to prevent people from thinking it's okay to sexually harm another person. So a formal definition of primary prevention is here. And primary prevention is a public health term, and this is describing interventions designed to prevent first-time perpetration. So this really looks at work that begins at birth. What are we doing as communities, as parents, as teachers, as faith-based institutions, medical professionals, all of us? What are we doing to instill, values, beliefs, attitudes that are supportive of treating people with kindness and respect and dignity, and seeing people as whole people that deserve to feel emotionally and physically safe at all times? So how do we raise people that would never think about sexually harming another person? This is the goal. That is primary prevention of sexual violence, is how do we raise communities? How do we foster communities in which people would never dream of harming another person in this way, right? So this is primary prevention. It's different from risk reduction. Risk reduction is one piece of it for people to feel a little safer, but it does nothing to truly prevent sexual violence from occurring anywhere, let alone on campuses. So let's take a quick step back real quick and look at sexual violence and the root of sexual violence, because that's the next thing we need to look at is why is sexual violence occurring? Why do we know that 1 in 5 individuals, 1 in 5 women will experience sexual violence in a lifetime? Why do more than half of everyone who identifies as trans will experience sexual violence at some point in their lifetime? We know that sexual violence is prevalent. And so this is our sexual violence continuum. And it really looks at different forms of sexual violence. And also it really addresses that it does not happen in a vacuum, and that sexual violence, the root of sexual violence, and it is oppression. So oppression is our root cause of sexual violence. That is why it occurs. We live in a society in which some bodies are worth more than other bodies. So specifically, white bodies in our society, if we're going to be very frank here, white bodies are more valuable than BIPOC bodies, Black, Indigenous, people of color bodies, right? Straight bodies are seen as more valuable and are more protected than queer bodies, right? Bodies within the LGBTQ plus community. So, or abled bodies are protected and seen as more valuable than bodies living with a disability. So we know that we have these power dynamics. Sexual violence is about power and control. And it is rooted in oppression. So when we think about our primary prevention work, we can never eliminate sexual violence if we are not targeting and working on how do we start working on how racism, sexism, ableism, heterosexism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, how this all shows up on a day-to-day basis for our communities. And so that is really what our prevention programming needs to be rooted in. The foundation of our work on college campuses, this needs to be a part of it. And the voices who need to be centered in our primary prevention work should be the ones that are disproportionately affected by sexual violence. And that is going to be BIPOC individuals, that's going to be individuals within the LGBTQ plus community, individuals with disabilities. This is, and of course, women, right? So this just gives us a little bit of a picture, a little bit of an understanding of sexual violence. And they also did not intend in this continuum, I want to make this point, they did not intend to say that someone's experience with flashing was more severe or more traumatic than someone's experience with sexual harassment. As you can see through the circle, they really just wanted to know, here are all these different forms, and we recognize that all survivors experience sexual violence differently or impacted differently. And here is kind of where this comes from. So we're also looking at social norms that perpetuate sexual violence, such as rigid gender roles, right? Little boys can't play with dolls and wear pink or wear dresses, right? These outrageous notions that colors and clothes have a gender, when we know that just isn't true. And then, we could go on and on looking at these different cultural, social norms examples, sexist jokes, rape jokes, really looking at even going to unequal pay, right? Pay gaps, the school to prison pipeline. We could go on and how so many different institutions in our communities perpetuate sexual violence on a day-to-day basis. So going back a little bit to primary prevention, what is our goal when we do primary prevention work? So what does this really look like? In the most simplest of terms, it's really about our attitudes and beliefs. They inform our thoughts, which then inform our behaviors. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to think about, How do we help? How do we form relationships with people? How do we engage in people in new ways so that we can ensure that their beliefs, their attitudes, and their thoughts are supportive of communities free of sexual violence, are supportive of the affirmation and celebration of all identities. And this is really what we're looking at. So one more model for you when we think about understanding primary prevention work in general, and then we'll get more specific on how this can look on college campuses. So primary prevention work has to occur at 4 different levels. This is a socio-ecological model. It is another public health model, and it really outlines how we as individuals are influenced on 4 different levels. We have our individual self. We're influenced by our relationships. So we're influenced by our family members, our friends, our colleagues, our fellow students, our extended family members, coaches, the list goes on, right? We're influenced by our community. Our community shapes who we are and how we think about sexual violence, how we think about ourselves, how we think about relationships, how we think about everything, right? And then, of course, we're also influenced by our society on a cultural level. And so this chart really outlines specifically individual factors that impact our views on sexual violence, as well as relationship, community, and societal. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this diagram because I really want to spend time on really looking at how these programs can look on college campuses. But just really quickly, this looks at what is somebody's experience growing up? Do they have they had experience in a violent home? Have they experienced sexual violence? Now, I want to make a point that someone who's experienced sexual violence, that does not mean they're going to perpetrate sexual violence in the future. That is one risk factor. They could have many other resilient factors that play into their life so that they would never consider sexually harming another individual. But their thoughts and feelings about thinking about social justice issues, thinking about safety for people, thinking about, how open are they? Are they culturally humble? Are they firm in their faith beliefs, but they also affirm that other people will have different faith beliefs, right? This all influences how we interact with other people. Because like I said earlier, sexual violence is not just what we think about relationships and sex. It is about what we think about each other as people and how we interact with one another as people. So our relationships, what model of a relationship? Was it a healthy relationship that they provide us if we had a 2-parent household? What about our grandparents, our aunt and uncles? Did we see examples of healthy relationships, of healthy communication, conflict resolution? Our friends, did our friends engage in a lot of locker room banter that was really aggressive and sexist and homophobic and transphobic? The list goes on, right? Because we know for young people, what our friends say is, we take that in, right? Young people put a lot of stock in what their friends believe and what they say because they want to fit in. We all want to belong. So whatever our circle says and believes, we're often going to try to fit into that because we just want to belong as well. Community. So our community, do we go to a school, for instance, where they talk about what are healthy relationships? What is consent? What are your rights under Title IX? Do I understand the policies concerning sexual harassment, dating violence, sexual assault? Do we talk about what is empathy? Do we talk about conflict resolution? Do we talk about the isms, right? These are big topics, but they affect us from birth, right? Once again, these are conversations and age-appropriate conversations that we can have very early on. And the school system can definitely be a part of this work. So what is our community saying? If we're part of a faith-based institution, are they talking about these forms of violences? Are they condemning them? Or is this not discussed? On a societal level as well, of course, we've got rape culture, we have oppression, We have these large systems that are either going to be supportive of survivors and preventing sexual violence, or we don't. And oftentimes we live in a society right now that we do not, right? So these are things we have to be working on from not just an individual level, but also relationship, community, and societal level. So that is why our prevention programming needs to be at least at a community level and not just presentations. So for example, individual counseling could be an intervention at the individual level. Family counseling or support groups could be more on a relationship level. Community level is looking at more, how do we engage more people? How do we engage our entire campus in social norms change? That's what we're looking at to make our campuses safer for all people. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about protective factors. These are the three things that we are really trying to promote in community. So the Center for Disease Control has a lot of research on risk factors. They have a lot of different risk factors on sexual violence. Protective factors, there's not as many, and research isn't as strong. But this is what we know, is that people who are more empathetic are much less likely to perpetrate sexual violence. People who believe in equity, people who believe that all people should be treated with utmost dignity and respect, they are much less likely to perpetrate sexual violence. And people who feel a sense of connection to their community. If I feel like I have a place in my community, if I feel like I belong with different people, if I feel like I have a teacher who sees me, a coach who sees me, maybe my neighbors, I have relationships with them. I go to the store across the street and the person at that store, they know my name. If I feel this connection to different people in my community, I am much less likely to perpetrate sexual violence or violence in general, because I feel that connection, I feel that love, I feel seen, I feel heard. I am much less likely to hurt anyone because I feel seen and cared for by people in my community. Without that community and connection and support, without that empathy, without that belief that equity is of utmost importance, I'm much more likely to cause harm and pain, because oftentimes that's what we're seeing in the media. That's what we're learning. That's what so many people are harming one another. We need to instill these three factors: empathy, equity, and community connection and support, for people to live in ways that is different than how we are living now, a way that promotes peace and compassion and care versus harm and violence. So let's look at how we really now move to what this can look like on college campuses, how we can look at communities leading change to eliminate sexual violence. For a long time in the state of Texas and across the country, not just here in the state of Texas, sexual assault and domestic violence organizations like my own, we might, not all agencies had prevention or education workers, but for a long time, we were doing work in schools where we were giving presentations or doing psychoeducational support groups with a handful of schools in our community with young people. We were doing 9 to 10 week, psychoeducational groups to help them understand what are healthy relationships, what is consent, what is conflict resolution, what is self-esteem, boundaries, these types of things. What is activism even? What is leadership? What's bystander intervention? These are great topics to discuss with young people, but this is not enough, right? Having a 9-week course, in a school system with a group of young people, they are receiving influences all the time from different people their entire life. So we have to shift our programming that is more community organizing approach than just these one-time presentations, 9-week groups. How can we shift and engage everybody in this work? Because also, I am one person. I have a team of 4. We're in Pasadena, right outside of Houston. I can't reach even half the young people in Pasadena, let alone the adults as well, with only 4 people for any significant amount of time. So we have to look at a community organizing approach, one that engages everyone. So when we look at community organizing, this was a foreign concept to me. I am my background is in social work, but all my education is in micro social work. So I thought I was going to be doing counseling for my career, and I quickly found out that macro level social change work, prevention work, is what I love. So when we think about community organizing, I always like to talk about the principles. What is this really about? And then we can go from there in understanding how this can really look like on our campuses. So we've already talked about community organizing looks like social change for all. So this looks like, how are we really working on making spaces that are safe for everyone, where everyone is seen, everyone is heard, it's accessible, people have access to the resources they need, people feel valued. We are working on bias on our campuses. We're working on the microaggressions that we hear on a daily basis, right? We're working on forming policies, practices, procedures that are supportive and culturally humble for all of our students on campuses, for all our colleagues too. This is some work that we're doing internally at our organization too, right? So our prevention, our primary prevention work on campuses, we have to take that anti-oppression, social justice framework approach. And how are we including and centering specifically BIPOC and queer voices in this work? And survivors, putting survivors at the forefront of this work. So whole community engagement. So just like I said earlier, what we have found with our community organizing program is that we want to get a core network team, and I'm going to be talking about this shortly, a core network team of, it could be anywhere from 5, 12 people, okay? And these are the people who are really passionate. They are activists, right? That maybe they don't even know they're activists, but they are. We see that potential in them. They care about sexual violence. They want to volunteer their time. They want to do this work on social change, and really look at how can we create different spaces. And so that I would recommend, have students be your core network team on your campuses. Begin recruiting students of all ages on your campus. And then, of course, a part of that network team, we want there to also be employees, staff, faculty who are supporting or who are engaging in this work alongside them. So we'll look at that a little bit. But when we think about community organizing work, we are wanting to engage everyone, counselors on campus, Title IX officers, different faculty and staff from different disciplines. We're not just looking at social work and public health individuals here. We're looking at folks in engineering, folks who are getting degrees in medicine, right? We're looking at everyone is affected by sexual violence. So everyone, and most people want to live in safe communities, right? Most people want this for themselves, for their friends, for their colleagues, fellow students. And so we're looking at how can we engage everyone from all levels on campus in this work together. Powerful relationships is another principle. So within your community organizing program, we want to make sure that we are taking time to build trust. So with our community organizing program, after we had our 6 or 7 people that came alongside of myself and one of my coworkers, we started meeting weekly. And we started during the height of COVID. And so we met virtually every week for an hour. And those first few weeks, all we did was just get to know each other. We engaged in icebreakers, trust building activities. We went through the Enneagram. And we learned about each other's personality types, and we talked about our strengths and our weaknesses. We really spent time just having fun, laughing, and getting to know one another. And we continue to do that. Now it's been 2.5 years. We continue to do that every single time we meet. We are more than just colleagues now, right? We are doing this work together, and we sustain this work, this very long-term work together, because we have built these really positive, strong relationships. We celebrate personal and professional wins with one another. This is really huge. And this is what community organizing can look like on campuses, students who are really coming together and with other individuals on campus, faculty and staff, to form these really strong relationships. This looks like beloved community. So beloved community means making spaces that are different. We're interacting with each other in different ways. We are forming spaces where we can hold one another accountable. These are hard conversations we're having about recognizing ways in which we've contributed to maybe white supremacy, right? Contributed to oppression, ways that we did not handle conflict directly. Maybe we were not engaged in conflict as we should. Maybe we did not hold ourselves accountable. With these spaces, we are building relationships in which we can hold one another accountable, in which we can heal together, because shame comes up. We've all experienced traumas. So these are really unique and beautiful spaces that is going to be new for our college campus setting. But it is going to be really powerful if we can create these kinds of spaces, because without this, we're not going to be able to sustain the multi-year long work that this needs in order to change social norms. Network leadership. So this looks like, so I am the director of education and prevention at the Bridge. And yes, technically I oversee the community organizing program we have with our volunteers in the community who are a part of this team. But when I'm in those spaces with them, I am not the leader. We are all collectively together leaders. There's not one leader of this group. So with student organizations on campus, there might be a president, right? A secretary, one person who leads it. This is a collective approach. We are all leading together. There is no one leader. And so we are all learning from one another. We are all bringing in our own expertise. And that is a really powerful aspect of community organizing work. Okay, just a few more principles here. Creative action. So this really looks at every community organizing program looks differently. We have to talk about what are we seeing in our community? What are its strengths? What are some areas that need some growth, need some work, and how are we going to achieve that? So what we're going to be talking about later is examples of primary prevention work. It doesn't all just look like consent conversations, right? This could look like, you know what? I know there is a lack of understanding of the importance of voting in our community. Let's have a workshop and Q&A session on civic engagement and what that looks like, and really what does local politics look like? What does my voice mean as a community member? Does my voice have power? So that's an example of action we can take that is rooted in primary prevention. Community strengths and assets. So we do not want to be focused on everything that's wrong, right? If we only focus on, ooh, here's what we really got to work on, we're not going to be able to sustain that. We also have to look at what is our specific community strength. So on your college campus, what is a strength for you? Is it that your students love the extracurriculars on campus? Is it that they love the student center? Do you have a really phenomenal student center where the students come and hang out and spend time? Are there leaders on campus, student leaders on campus that are already doing incredible activism work? Engage them. Are there already survivors who have organized a group? Talk to them. This could look so many different ways. Do you have faculty and staff who are really already working on social change, who are building strong relationships with students? These are assets and strengths. Where do your students feel safe and comfortable? Where are already pockets of this kind of community organizing principle showing up? That is significant. And then, of course, persistence and patience. This work takes decades, right? Honestly, when we think about eliminating sexual violence, preventing sexual violence, reducing the numbers, it takes years. Students are at least on campus. Most of them are at least on campus for 4 years, if not a little longer. How can we really build up community organizing programs that sustain for years, right? With our students. And it's going to be really slow work. We're not going to have grand successes right away, right? That's okay. What we also know is that change has to be internal. We have a lot of change that we have to do ourselves. And in these community spaces, in these network team spaces, really significant change happens within ourselves and other people. And then that will slowly reach their peers out in the community as well. As we change, others will change too, right? So this work, it takes a long time. It feels discouraging, but we've got to stick with it, because that is how we eventually move away from having social norms on our campuses that are supportive of sexual violence. So quickly, I wanted to show you this diagram that really looks at the basic principles and stages of action for the close to home approach. So this is a community organizing approach that we use here at the Bridge Over Troubled Waters. This is not our program. This was a program founded out in the Northeast. And it's a really incredible community organizing program that folks have adopted all over the country. Oakland, LA, they're doing some really great close to home community organizing work. And this is what it looks like for us. So really specifically, this first phase, once you get your team of people, the team of students who are really passionate about preventing sexual assault on campus, what they will first do is figuring out, how do we look at, kind of do a climate survey on campus? What are we seeing? What are the norms? Do students think sexual violence is a problem on campus? Do employees and faculty see instances of sexual violence? What are they seeing? Are people intervening? Are they seeing different levels of bystander intervention, or are they not? Where do young people feel safe on campus? Where do they feel a sense of connection? What do people want to see more on their campuses? Do people feel safe? And so coming up with questions to find out more about specifically our community. So understand, assess, what are people's interests in this issue? What do they already know about the issue? What is happening on our college campuses? Who are already our leaders on campus? Who are already those safe people that students go to? Or who already is leading the work, so we can bring them in. So we'll engage in interviews, we'll engage in focus groups. I know we just literally were doing this work in the city of South Houston. We went to the park and we sat on a park bench and just observed. You can find out so much about community by just sitting and observing as well. So taking those observational notes. It doesn't just have to be through a survey that you gather data about your community. You can sit in your student center, maybe have this group all hang out at the student center and just observe, what are other young people talking about? What are they doing? How are they engaging with one another? Are they engaging with faculty and staff? Are they coming around? What does this look like? What is the energy on campus? What are responses? The list goes on, right? And then what we're going to begin to do, once we gather this data and this understanding of our specific community, of our campus, then we're really going to be starting to talk about, what did we discover? What do we want to begin implementing? What do we already know is going well on our campus, and what can we improve upon? What do we specifically see is an issue? Is it could it be this locker room banter? Is that something? Do people really not? Do we want to talk about what are healthy relationships? Do we want to talk about what does basic consent look like? Do we want to talk about shame and accountability and conflict resolution? Do we want to talk about microaggressions that are occurring, and how do we begin to target those? So this is having conversations with different people and engaging them and figuring out, where do we want our programming to go? And then goes to our build phase. So then this is where we start holding activities, events, workshops that target these areas of, we want to promote empathy, we want to promote a sense of community connection, and promote equity on our campus. So our network team will really work to figure out, what kind of events do we want to host, and how are we going to target and engage people from all over our campus, not just our social work students, not just our sociology students or psychology students, but how are we engaging those engineers too, those students who are in the medical field, who do not do this social justice work maybe on a day-to-day basis, right? Or at least not in the school setting. And then of course, the ACT phase. So this is when we are really starting to implement our programming. We are implementing these activities, And these phases, we can go back. It's not a strict go through phase 1 through 4. We could get to the build phase and say, you know what, we need to go back and do some more assessment. Let's go and do these different assessment techniques, or let's ask these different questions so we can go back to the assess phase, right? So this is not linear. We can jump around with these phases. But this is a really beautiful program, and I encourage you to check out their website and their information. If you want to learn more about specifically close to home, please feel free to contact me as well. I have my contact at the end of the PowerPoint. So just some brief tips for kicking off a community organizing program. Consider partnering with a domestic violence or sexual assault organization. So just in the Harris County area alone and surrounding counties, we have multiple sexual assault and domestic violence organizations, many of which have staff that focus on education and prevention. If you don't have someone on your campus within a gender resource center, or a women's center, if you don't have those things on campus, or a Title IX office where you have the capacity for an advisor to kind of help facilitate the student organizing program, the network team, if you don't have someone who can dedicate the time to foster this team, reach out. The sexual assault and domestic violence organizations, we're here. This is our job, to really work with community partners and change social norms. So we would be more than happy to partner. Start small. So it's okay if you only start off with maybe a counselor at your school wants to kind of lead up and oversee the program, or maybe someone within the title office. It's okay if you only have 5 students to start. Start there. It will grow. It just takes time. More students will hear about it once you start holding more interest meetings, events, once your network team members start talking more with their friends about what's happening. Once you start maybe having campaigns around campus and publishing more marketing materials, once your TikToks get some more views and your reels, once they start going viral, more people will join the movement. So don't be discouraged if you only start with a few people. It will grow. So consider your recruitment techniques. So we found at the Bridge, so we were posting on our Facebook, we were just doing posts, and we were posting on our Instagram, we were putting out flyers in the community, we were talking to all our community partners about, hey, we're starting this community organizing program. Do you know people who might be interested and passionate about eliminating sexual violence? Holding these really important conversations in community. And we were not getting much. So we were thinking, wow, what are we doing wrong? How can we recruit in a more meaningful way that's going to attract people? And so we had a brilliant staff member named Daniela Garcia. I have to give her credit. And she is now at Texas Association Against Sexual Assault doing this work. But she said, you know what, let's do some reels and let's recruit through reels. And so we started making short reels, clips, TikToks, recruiting people, talking about this program. And before we knew it, we had multiple people, some people who we already were engaged in, former interns, people who had volunteered with us, who already knew the Bridge, but until we had posted that video, that caught their eye and they said, oh yes, like I want to become a part of this program. So before we knew it, we had 7 people reaching out to us saying, I want to come, and they stuck with us. So we have to consider how we're recruiting people to help in this movement, in this work. Food and incentives. This is hard work that we're doing. These discussions are hard. They can be triggering. Engaging people takes a lot of time. Our group, we meet every single week and we do events on top of that. It's a lot of time. We can't always pay and give stipends to students. If your college campus has the funds that you can pay your core network team students, those members, pay them a stipend each month, that would be amazing. If you can't do that, what about providing food? Can you make sure that they have food for most of their meetings or at least their events? Can you provide them with gift cards or incentives that they can give out during their events to draw in more students, faculty, and staff when they hold those community events? Celebrate the small successes. So a small success is like, oh gosh, we've been together for 6 months doing this work, meeting every single week. We meet from 8 to 9 o'clock at night. On Wednesday nights on a weekly basis. So people are probably going to be meeting at different times. How can we honor each other and celebrate small successes. Oh my gosh, we had 5 new people come to an event who we never talked to before. Wow, we held this event in the quad, and people who weren't even planning to come to the event just saw us, stopped by, and had questions. That's a win, right? We are drawing more people in. More people are seeing what we're doing. That's a success. And of course, like we've already talked about, I want to reiterate, within this network team, within our circles, this work has to be centered and led by folks who are most affected by oppression, most affected by sexual violence. Okay, and so let's look at what these events could look like specifically. So this could be storytelling events. This could be events where people just come together and share about relationships, toxic relationships. Maybe they share about body image. Maybe they share about consent. And so this is just people coming together and talking about their experiences. And it forms incredible connection. It forms incredible empathy. There's no expert in the space. We are just validating one another and letting each other know that we're there for them, and we hear them. They're such powerful spaces, and that's something you can do virtually or in person. If you have a large turnout, you can put people in different groups to have these storytelling sessions. You can have community conversations concerning shame and accountability. We know that shame is the #1 barrier for people being able to take accountability. And when I say accountability, I just mean maybe like I said something that hurt your feelings, or I did something that hurt your feelings. It doesn't have to be this grave offense. It could be something really small, or something that you did really upset me. And so with this accountability is about, how do we address it in a healthy way? How do we talk with one another? How do we solve this issue without pulling away from each other, without guilt, resentment, and shame getting in the way? So these are really powerful conversations in reshaping ourselves, reprogramming ourselves, and how we interact with other people, how we show up in the world, in our full selves, and acknowledging that we're going to mess up. And when we apologize, we actually mean it, and we're gonna change our behavior for the future. So if I say something that's hurtful for someone else, microaggression, I need to hear, wow, what did I do? I can't only just apologize, but then I need to really do my own work and reflect why I said that. Why is that a bias I hold, and how do I work on it? Make sure that doesn't come out again. This can look like having a field day, having a meditation event, an art event, a yoga event, a dance event on campus that's free and open to anybody. What are your students interested? If it's field day, if it's sports, great. Or if they're more of an artsy crowd, let's do art in the park. Let's do some yoga. This builds community connection, right? A lot of people say, well, what does a yoga event have to do with preventing sexual violence? It has to do with tuning into yourself, feeling connected with other people, having access to something that normally costs a lot of money to relax and engage with other people in a very healing, relaxing way. This is prevention of sexual violence work. Laughing along and playing basketball with people you've never played basketball before is fun for people who like sports, right? That's enjoyable. Holding a market, a community market, featuring local artists and small businesses. A lot of young people have their own businesses now, right? Let's elevate the work that they're doing. Let's showcase that work. Let's build community across people who have small businesses, help them to build more support for each other. And that builds, once again, community connections. Let's shop local, right? Let's support one another. Reels and TikToks, let's engage in fun education work. So Reels, TikToks, let's talk about some serious things on there with music, making it more engaging, making it so it's accessible to young people. So what kind of work are we doing that really requires students to be a part of? Because they know what's trending, right? We don't want adults trying to come in and making these TikToks and Reels that aren't going to resonate with young people. Young people are doing the work. Let's let them showcase. And then it could be a community block party. So just bringing people together, having fun. This is primary prevention of sexual violence. One thing that I don't have in here for tips is, in addition to taking it slow and building relationships, take time to train. So bring in experts on prevention of sexual violence, on community organizing, on rape culture, on oppression. Let's talk about what are these things, right? And so that when we get questions, we can talk about them in organic, in true ways, right? We have a lot of lived experience that informs our understanding, and that is really powerful. And let's take time to learn from one another and from people who really do this work on a daily basis too, right? So that is my presentation for concerning how do we bring primary prevention alive on college campuses. Thank you so much for being here and hearing all of this information. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me anytime. That is my email address. Thank you all.